Could Satoru Gojo exorcise the ace of the Ten-Shadows Cursed Technique Mahoraga? With the recent chapters of Jujutsu Kaisen and Sukuna recently obtaining the Ten-Shadows Cursed Technique, now more than ever a debate between who can defeat one of, if not, the strongest Shikigami in the series has come back into discussion, with Mahoraga being the trump card outside of domain expansion for really any user of the Ten-Shadows Cursed Technique. With his also extremely unusual set of skills, I felt it would be interesting to put him up against one of the strongest sorcerers in Jujutsu Kaisen who also possesses an extremely unusual set of abilities, Satoru Gojo. While knowing a similar matchup to this happened in the past eras of Jujutsu between the Zenin clan head and the head of the Gojo clan, it only adds fuel to the fire of an already heated discussion. If you enjoy Jujutsu Kaisen content, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and comment on some video ideas you want to see be done down below. Let's first get into what makes Mahoraga one of, if not the strongest Shikigami in Jujutsu Kaisen. While many other Shikigami in the Ten-Shadows arsenal like Divine Dogs and Rabbit Escape are usually brought out in groups, or other Shikigami like Great Serpent or Nue work together strategically to defeat opponents, Mahoraga works completely independently. In the fanbook, it said that this Shikigami has not yet been subdued by any past Ten-Shadow technique users. While talking with Megami, Gojo tells Megami a story about a battle from the past involving two clan heads before the government formed around the big three Jujutsu families. The Gojo clan head possessed the Six Eyes and Limitless Curse technique like our modern day Satoru Gojo, and the Zenin clan head was blessed with the Ten-Shadows Curse technique like our very own Megami Fushiguro. The fight resulted in the death of both clan heads dying in battle against one another, and both the Gojo and Zenin clan being on bad terms even during present day. It's implied that Gojo had told the story to Megami to illustrate the potential of the Ten-Shadows Curse technique even one day being strong enough to take down a sorcerer similar to himself. During the Shibuya incident, Megami began to hypothesize a strategy used by the Zenin clan head in the past. While Megami begins explaining the ins and outs of the Ten-Shadows Curse technique, he says that he bets the clan head used it in the same way. What Megami is referring to is a latch-ditch effort and a final move for any Ten-Shadows user who's incapable of exorcising this monster. Megami continues to say that to control the Ten-Shadows, you need to exorcise the Shikigami in order to tame them and use them in combat. But summoning the Shikigami is something that a Ten-Shadows user can do at any time, resulting in a ritual to begin taming them. But by using the ritual aspect strategically, Ten-Shadows users can begin the ritual to exorcise them while in battle and force their opponent to take part, creating a third opponent for both parties seemingly out of thin air. If neither the caster or his opponent can defeat this Shikigami, the ritual will end in the death of both sorcerers. Megami saying he believes the Zenin clan head used Mahoraga back then to suicide against the Gojo clan head, like he's planning on doing right now, means that the result of the battle that led Gojo to imply that Megami could one day surpass him was dictated by this monster Mahoraga. During the Shibuya incident, in order to void the ritual, Sukuna was forced to defeat the Shikigami as an outsider to save Megami's life. Mahoraga immediately begins by slamming down his sword on top of Sukuna, but of course he blocks, but Sukuna notices something special about Mahoraga's blade. The fanbook calls the sword of extermination, and it says that the blade is completely enveloped in positive energy, same as reverse curse technique, making it a perfect weapon for dealing with cursed spirits. Sukuna begins analyzing the blade and reiterates the info that we get from the fanbook, but says that if he was a cursed spirit, even while blocking that attack, he would have been a goner. Mysteriously, this sort of wheel begins to spin on top of Mahoraga's head, but we'll get to that later. Physically, Mahoraga is also a monster. He's able to take punches from Sukuna, and even Sukuna's own curse technique wasn't enough to fully cut through him. Mahoraga can also launch attacks with enough force to throw Sukuna through numerous buildings, and even take Sukuna's own slashing attack at point blank range to his face, before getting kicked down to the ground. Later on during the Culling games, Mahoraga was also able to break down Yorozu's entire domain expansion and destroy her true sphere in one blow. This true sphere is made with Yorozu's construction curse technique, and it's a creation said to be impossible to form. It's a shape with no contact area, therefore creating infinite pressure. Yorozu goes as far as saying it's untouchable, and even somebody on the level of Sukuna would get completely eviscerated. The ability that led Mahoraga this far, however, is undoubtedly the best ability in his arsenal, and arguably the best ability in the series, his adaptability. Mahoraga is able to what Sukuna calls adapt to any and all phenomena. The fanbook says that it analyzes enemy attacks in order to gain resistance and land effective hits. We see this in real time a few times during his displays in combat. Earlier, I referenced how Mahoraga, after attempting to land a sword strike on Sukuna, Mahoraga's wheel began to turn and his adaptation process began. Later, he attempted to throw a similar sword strike at Sukuna, but Mahoraga switches the power source from positive cursed energy to normal cursed energy, most likely realizing that Sukuna is not a cursed spirit, meaning it would be more optimal to use regular cursed energy. As for Sukuna's slashing attacks, Mahoraga went from being slashed and unaware of Sukuna's curse technique to being able to recognize and properly defend accordingly. Both of these occurred only after Sukuna says the mysterious wheel on top of his head began to turn. This wheel is Furu's incantation of the 10 sacred treasures. This allows him to adapt to any and all phenomena, similar to throwing a late move in rock paper scissors. While at first glance, this seemingly overpowered and uncontrollable ability may be impossible to overcome, but there is actually still a way to beat Mahoraga. Sukuna theorizes that the only way to defeat the Shikigami is to slaughter it with a new attack before it begins to adapt. However, Sukuna doesn't know know if Mahoraga had already adapted to cleave or slashing attacks in general. Before Mahoraga finished adapting, Sukuna activated a new technique and ended up defeating the Shikigami, ending the ritual. Maharaga's adaptation means that in a fight with Satoru Gojo, the battle will come down to technique rather than simply strength and speed. As we saw during Maharaga's fight with Sukuna, even while Sukuna can land hits and outspeed and dodge Mahoraga, he's seemingly undefeatable without ending the fight through technique and strategy. To fully illustrate if Gojo could beat Mahoraga, we'll dive into his arsenal to see if he has any techniques that would be capable of ending the monster. Born into the Gojo clan and possessing all of its treasures, Satoru Gojo is not the sorcerer to push aside lightly. Satoru possesses the Six Eyes, a rare inherited genetic gift between members of the Gojo clan. The Six Eyes grant the user extraordinary perception, allowing Satoru to clearly perceive and survey sights across insanely far distances. Most notably during the Goodwill event, Satoru was able to see Yuji, Hanami, and Todo and even gauge Yuji's power from insane heights across extremely vast distances in between. Aside from its crazily enhanced perceptive capabilities, the Six Eyes allow Gojo to hardly use any cursed energy. Yuta explains that while he holds more cursed energy than Gojo, his cursed energy manipulation is so refined and precise that he barely wastes any cursed energy when activating a cursed technique. The exact wording used by Yuta is infinitesimally close to zero, infinitesimal being a value that's so small that it's actually closer to zero than any real standard number, meaning Gojo can never run out of cursed energy from using any of his cursed techniques. Miguel also says that the Six Eyes grant Gojo the ability to manipulate cursed energy so precisely that he's actually doing it on an atomic level to control space itself. What Miguel is referring to is one of, if not the most powerful curse techniques in the entire series, the Limitless Curse Technique. The Limitless Curse Technique is an inherited or innate technique passed down throughout generations of sorcery in the Gojo family. While any descendant of the Gojo clan could possess the Limitless, only those lucky enough to be born with both the Six Eyes and the Limitless Curse Technique can use its abilities. And luckily for Satoru, he's the first in 100 years to possess both the Six Eyes and the Limitless together throughout all the members of the Gojo clan. The most notable ability granted from the Limitless is Infinity. By involving a convergence of an infinite series, nearly anything that approaches Gojo when this technique is active approaches extremely slowly and will never reach their intended target. The fanbook says that the Gojo clan's inherited technique is a barrier that manifests infinity and prevents any contact. In short, by using Infinity, Gojo can create an infinite space in between himself and everything else in range, creating one of Shonen's greatest form of defense that we've ever seen. But Infinity is only the cover page for the rest of Gojo's pretty insane arsenal. By amplifying the Limitless's Infinity, things like natural negative numbers and impossible situations like -1 apples begin to manifest. Gojo can create a magnetic-like effect and pull and attract objects or even people. This is blue. Like Gojo mentioned earlier, he can use its power of attraction to pull nearly anything, but it can also be used to destroy large areas for various purposes, as we see him do in his introduction to Hidden Inventory in his first fight with Toji. This is the convergence being employed into the Limitless Curse Technique at its finest. While the convergence of space is possible through the Limitless, the opposite is also possible by amplifying Infinity, Divergence. Using Reverse Curse Technique to multiply together positive energy to power the Limitless's convergence, the opposite effect of Divergence is born. This is Curse Technique Reversal Red. While the Limitless's blue attracts and pulls objects in range, red has the power to repel by using the divergence of space. Gojo's red is also capable of throwing targets across insanely far distances, as we see done both to Toji and Jogo. While amplifying Infinity to create the convergence and divergence effect using the Limitless's blue and red serve a very useful purpose separately, combining the two gives birth to a trump card for any Limitless and Six Eyes sorcerer who can pull it off: Hollow Purple. Purple is born by colliding both infinities, motion, and reversal. This results in an imaginary mass rushing forth, absolutely destroying everything in its path. The size of purple can be adjusted, but at the biggest we've seen, it's absolutely massive in size. Surely, in my opinion, large enough for Mahoraga, but we'll touch more on that later. As for the domain department, Satoru Gojo surely is not lacking. By combining both his innate domain with his Limitless Curse Technique, Unlimited Void is born. While being able to activate his domain expansion at insanely fast speeds, Satoru Gojo's domain expansion holds the ability to render multiple special grade level cursed spirits unable to fight. Upon being trapped inside of Unlimited Void, the victim is dumped with useless information, but in extremely large quantities. Even when opening the Unlimited Void for an extremely short amount of time against the disaster curses, Mahito, Jogo, and Choso had their fighting capabilities completely neutralized by overloading their brains with the insane quantity of information Unlimited Void forces onto its targets. The fanbook says that Gojo Satoru's domain expansion, which brings the target inside of the Limitless and forces them to endlessly perform life activities, like perception and communication. Gojo is also able to apply his techniques strategically, a step beyond simply activating them on opponents. Gojo is able to use Reverse Curse Technique, which is running at all times to constantly keep his brain refreshed and ready for combat. Gojo is also able to create an automatic detection and deactivation system for his Infinity, furthering the usefulness of his already insane defense. First, I'll elaborate a little bit more on the win conditions for this fight. When it comes down to it, like I've mentioned already, Mahoraga's adaptation forces the battle to come down to technique. Sukuna had mentioned during his encounter with Mahoraga in Shibuya that the only way to defeat the Shikigami is by slaughtering it with a new attack before it can adapt. And there's obviously a few ways to do this. The first is for Gojo to obviously launch an attack that can exorcise Mahoraga in one blow, ending the fight in one move before he can adapt. The second is to put Mahoraga in a condition to what Sukuna had done in Shibuya. Putting Mahoraga in a position where he's forced to sit and regenerate will leave him open for a second attack to completely end the fight before the adaptation process can finish. In other words, Gojo doesn't necessarily have to one-shot Mahoraga. Landing as many blows as required is acceptable as long as the Shikigami is exercised before the end of the adaptation process. With that in mind, what we need to compare is the attacks in Gojo's arsenal that fit this criteria. Let's first start by comparing Teen Gojo after his awakening against Toji. While Gojo's Infinity will serve as an amazing defense at first, eventually Mahoraga can debatably adapt to this. Like I've mentioned before, blue and red are the amplified opposites created by using Infinity, convergence and divergence. This is made all the more consistent by the graph that we see in the fanbook showing that both blue and red are created directly by amplifying Infinity. When being hit with blue and red, Mahoraga may be able to adapt to Infinity along with it. During Mahoraga's fight with Sukuna, Mahoraga began adapting to Sukuna's Cursed Technique Dismantle, but what was unknown to Sukuna at the time was that Mahoraga hadn't just adapted to Dismantle, but slashing attacks in general, meaning all slashing attacks like Cleave that aren't necessarily Dismantle became useless against Mahoraga. If Mahoraga is able to do something similar with blue or red, it would mean Infinity is also rendered useless. Aside from the basic forms of the Limitless, Gojo right now has no real way to exercise Mahoraga. Both blue and red don't seem to hold a destructive capacity to end the fight against the Shikigami. It's implied even a year later that Gojo's domain isn't as refined as the Unlimited Void that we know in the present day, as Gojo tells both Shoko and Geto that he needs to continue working on his domain specifically along with a few of his other techniques. Meaning at bare minimum, if he even has a domain expansion, at this point we can't say for sure that it would have the qualities of the Unlimited Void that we see on screen to overload and stun Mahoraga. While purple is the only viable option for Gojo to exercise the Shikigami, the only purple that we see at this point is too small to exercise Mahoraga before he can adapt, meaning this version of Gojo has no real way to exercise Mahoraga and he will likely be defeated like the past Gojo clan member to fight this monster. However, if we take the present day Gojo, he has a multitude of techniques that should be able to exercise Mahoraga. In volume 0, we see that Gojo is able to completely destroy a cursed spirit with one red that seems to be sizable enough to handle Mahoraga. But even aside from red, Gojo's grown his hollow purple to a massive size. As we see during the Goodwill event, Gojo's purple is able to completely tear through the area and might in fact be overqualified for being sizable enough to exercise Mahoraga. If Gojo launches hollow purple at Mahoraga, it will undoubtedly exercise the Shikigami and end the fight without even needing to use domain expansion. However, this is only if Gojo would use hollow purple and tries to purposely destroy Mahoraga and doesn't give him time to adapt. As we saw during Goodwill, Gojo didn't even fully kill Hanami using purple, even though a purple on that caliber would fully be enough to rip through Hanami easily. If Gojo uses hollow purple the same way he did against Hanami and doesn't completely destroy Mahoraga before he can adapt, Gojo will surely lose the fight. But let me know your thoughts below. If you enjoyed Jujutsu Kaisen content, please leave a like and subscribe, and comment on some video ideas you want to see be done down below.